My name is Audrey. My mother gave birth to me when she was 43 and my father was nearly 50. They always saw my existence as a late mistake. We were perfectly happy with Elise, my mother once said, not even glancing in my direction. Her voice carried no malice, only a chilling indifference, like she was reading off an old utility bill. If it hadn't been for my grandparents' insistence, I likely wouldn't be here. Elise was the eldest, 12 years my senior, and almost a flawless symbol in my parents' eyes. While I played alone under the table with cheap crayons, Elise would strut past, reciting lines from TV shows and listing the names of prestigious universities she planned to apply to. "Where's little Audrey?" a relative once asked during Elise's birthday party. My mother merely shrugged, downstairs, probably doodling or something. I learned to stay quiet very early. Even if I spoke up, no one really listened. Each morning, while Elise was putting on makeup for her private high school, I was dropped off at my grandparents' house. "She's your responsibility," my father would say bluntly, tossing his keys onto the kitchen counter. My mother would just nod, as if handing over something unwanted. No goodbye kisses, no reminders, not a single question about what I might need. But in the small house at the end of Cedar Street, I wasn't an accidental child. There, my grandparents called me a joyful surprise. My grandfather took me to the park, taught me how to throw a ball, how to count spare change. My grandmother always had warm banana bread waiting for me after school. I remember sitting at the kitchen table as she wiped the ink smudges off my fingers with a cloth, smiling as she said, "You're like your grandfather. You love to write." In that home, I got to be a real child. No one made me scrub toilets at 6 years old. No one turned off my bedroom lights early to save electricity. No one compared me to Elise every single day. At night, when my parents came to pick me up, they were usually late and visibly annoyed. My father sighed as he stepped through the door. My mother scrolled through her phone while I put on my shoes. "Hurry up, Audrey, I've got things to do." On the drive home, they never asked what I ate or how school was going. They just listened to the news or argued about bills. Eventually, staying at my grandparents' place wasn't an exception. It became the norm. I spent nearly my entire childhood there. On weekends, when other kids went to the park with their parents, I planted tomatoes in the backyard with my grandfather. I never once saw him lose his temper, even the day I spilled an entire pot of fertilizer on his leather shoes. He just shook his head and smiled. "That's okay. Shoes can be washed. But you've got to learn to pay attention." One morning, when I was 8, my mother suddenly said, "From now on, you'll help clean the house." Her voice cut through the kitchen like a command. My father nodded in agreement, flipping through his newspaper. Elise used to mop the floor every night at her age. I opened my mouth to protest, but stopped when I saw the empty look in my mother's eyes. From that day on, I understood. Asking for help only earned more scolding. Each day after school, I no longer returned to my grandparents' house. Instead, I was handed a list of chores: vacuuming, folding laundry, doing dishes. Elise was busy studying for the SAT. My mother sometimes left sticky notes on the fridge. "Don't forget to vacuum under the couch. You missed it last time." Just a line, no name. No thank you. I learned to handle homework on my own, to do laundry by myself, to cook using old library books, but every night I would sneak my phone and call my grandparents. Just hearing them say, "Are you okay, Audrey?" made my heart feel a little lighter. My grandfather once told me, "Some kids aren't planned, but they end up being the brightest light in someone's life." I held on to those words the way people cling to the last warmth in the longest winter. I was in 11th grade when Elise suddenly announced, "Grant and I are engaged." She shouted it across the living room like she'd just won the lottery. Grant was a young dentist from a well-off family in Utah, someone she had only been dating for 8 months. I stood by the staircase, clutching a folder filled with scholarship documents. Before I could say anything, my mother had already thrown her arms around Elise, crying tears of joy. "We need to throw a proper wedding." My father clapped like it was the most obvious thing in the world. He even pulled out an old savings book, flipping through the pages as if he'd been waiting for this moment his entire life. No one asked Elise if she wanted something simple. No one even looked my way. The following weeks turned into a whirlwind of preparations, dress fittings, venue tours, ring selections. My mother took Elise to an upscale bridal boutique in West Haven, where a hand-embroidered white gown cost as much as a semester at Emory. She's the eldest daughter. We have to do it right, my mother said when I asked how much she planned to spend on the wedding. I lost count of how many times I had to stay home to sign for deliveries, take calls from the sound system vendors, or wash 10 sets of table linens because the dry cleaner didn't do them right. Dinner during that time was usually cold sandwiches because my mother was too busy to cook, and I wasn't allowed to use the kitchen in case I got in the way of the decorators. The wedding was held on a spring day in a spacious garden on the outskirts of Bellevue. Over 200 guests attended, with a live band, private shuttles for out-of-town relatives, and a 3-tier cake with glass domes holding fresh flowers inside. I was assigned to hold guests' purses and take Grant's little nephews to the bathroom. No one introduced me as the bride's sister. A week after the wedding, I received acceptance letters from 3 universities, all with top-tier finance programs. I had never felt so proud. A perfect GPA, strong extracurriculars, and a personal essay my guidance counselor called sharp and heartfelt. I waited until dinner to share the news. I got into UC Berkeley, Rice, and Vanderbilt, I said, my voice slightly trembling. My father raised an eyebrow. My mother glanced up from the pile of unwashed dishes. "Well, that's nice," she said slowly. "But you know, after Eli's wedding, we don't have any money left." I froze. "You mean you can't pay for college?" My father set down his glass with a heavy thud. "We took out an extra $60,000 in loans to cover the wedding. If you want to go to college, you'll need to get a job or apply for loans." I stared at my hands, the same hands that had written hundreds of essays and typed thousands of lines of data in advanced math, and suddenly felt like a stranger in my own body. "But you paid for Eli's tuition in full," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Elise had a clear direction from the start," my mother replied. "You, on the other hand, one day you wanted to be an accountant, the next a venture capitalist, then you talked about studying humanities. We're not sure you'll stick with anything." I left the dinner table without asking to be excused, for the first time in my life. I went upstairs, locked the door, and sat on the floor like someone who'd just been shoved out of a beautiful dream. I called my grandparents, trying to keep my voice steady. My grandmother answered, and the moment I said, "I don't think I can go to college," she shouted, "Henry, get the folder! We need to talk!" When I arrived, they were already seated in the living room. On the table was a thick folder labeled Audrey, Education Fund. Inside were account statements, compound interest spreadsheets, even a life insurance policy listing me as the beneficiary. "We started saving when you were just 3 months old," my grandfather said. "Every year, we put away part of our benefits and dividends. We knew your parents might not think that far ahead." I broke down in tears, not out of anger or sadness, but because for the first time, I felt chosen, not as an obligation, but as something deeply valued. That night, I didn't go back to my parents' house. I packed a few clothes, a few favorite books, and left a note with just 4 words. "I've made my choice." I started my freshman year at Rice University feeling like someone stepping out of the shadows. Finance wasn't easy, but I cherished every moment in the lecture halls. Despite a packed schedule, I eagerly joined the university's investment analysis club. One of the reports I wrote on renewable energy stocks was selected by Professor Lawrence, the head of the finance department, as a case study for the graduate-level seminar. "You have a rare kind of thinking," he told me during a one-on-one advising session. "If you keep this up, you can go anywhere." While I was quietly rebuilding my future, step by step, Elise was beginning to spiral. She never said it directly, but the news trickled through Sunday night phone calls from my grandmother. "Elise just changed jobs for the 3rd time," she sighed, "and I heard Grant quit completely. He's staying home with the baby now." I wasn't surprised. Grant had always been good at talking, not much else. Their first child arrived before Elise could stabilize her career. Of course, my mother flew out immediately to offer emotional support. My father transitioned to part-time consulting so he could be more available. They even sold the family SUV to help Elise with the deposit on a new apartment. My grandparents watched all this in silence. One evening, while visiting them, my grandfather pulled a newspaper from under his armchair and laid it flat on the coffee table. He tapped a small headline, "Margaret, your mother, emptied the joint retirement account." The bank called us to confirm, but they never mentioned it to us beforehand. I blinked. When? Last week, my grandmother said, eyes fixed on her cooling cup of tea. That money was for our old age, but they said Elise couldn't cover Lucy's preschool tuition. Something inside me cracked. Money meant to give my grandparents peace and comfort was being burned for repeated mistakes. Meanwhile, my life was moving forward. During my sophomore year, I was accepted into an internship program at an investment firm called Fairborn Partners in Austin. Initially, I handled support tasks, entering data, scheduling meetings, printing reports. But 3 weeks in, when the analysis team hit a snag on a complicated merger case, I submitted a risk report using a model I had built on my own. "Who's the intern from Rice?" the department had asked, flipping to page 5. From then on, I was invited to every important meeting. That summer, not only was I offered an extension, but I also received a bonus for practical contributions to market analysis. Elise, meanwhile, started calling my grandmother weekly. Sometimes it was to borrow money because Grant's contract got delayed. Other times, she needed someone to watch the baby for a few days so she could attend an interview. My grandmother never refused. "But you understand, Audrey," she said gently when I asked. "She's still my daughter." I stayed silent, but inside I was boiling. People loved to use the word family as a shield for selfishness, while the kindest ones always bore the weight. At the end of that year, I came home for the holidays and found out that my grandfather had sold his old Ford, the only car he used to drive my grandmother to her regular medical appointments. "And to help Elise with Lucy's school fees," my grandmother said quickly, as if it wasn't worth discussing. "Your grandfather said he could take the bus." I couldn't take it anymore. That night, I wrote Elise a nearly 3-page email, listing every time she drained my grandparents' resources, every unpaid loan, every broken promise. I sent it around midnight, not to argue, but to make sure she knew no one was blind anymore. 3 days later, Elise called back, not to apologize, but to accuse. "You've always been jealous of me," she screamed through the phone. "Ever since we were kids, I tried so hard to get them to love me more. I was better. I was kinder. But in the end, they chose you." Didn't respond. I simply deleted her number. I didn't want to be chosen. I wanted to be seen. And I had done that on my own, not because someone lifted me up, but because I built myself from the ground. I graduated summa cum laude on a sunny May afternoon, surrounded by cheers and floating confetti across the university lawn. Professor Lawrence handed me my diploma, leaning in as he shook my hand. "Never forget, Audrey. You were born to lead." 3 weeks later, I started my first job at a venture capital firm in Chicago, earning a 6-figure starting salary with performance-based equity. My apartment was on the 21st floor of a riverside tower, complete with granite countertops and floor-to-ceiling windows. For the first time in my life, I woke up in a space where no one expected me to clean up after anyone. I just had to care for myself, and I did it better than anyone else ever had. I didn't keep in touch with my parents or Elise. For 2 years, silence became the default. No calls, no visits, no apologies. I assumed they were managing, somehow. As for me, I poured everything into my work. Every successful deal became a milestone I placed into the foundation of my own life. Sometimes I stared out at the city lights cutting across concrete skyscrapers and wondered, if my grandparents were still alive, would they be proud of me? Then, one early winter morning, my phone rang from an unknown number. "Miss Audrey Winters?" "Yes." "This is the head nurse from St. Jude's Medical Center. Henry Winters was brought in after sudden cardiac arrest. We're very sorry." I didn't cry. I stood frozen in my sleek downtown office, my heartbeat slowing with each breath. 4 hours later, I arrived at the hospital. My grandmother sat in the hallway, her wool blanket slipping to the floor. She looked at me as if I'd stepped out of a memory. I knelt down and hugged her without saying a word. "Him kept your picture on his desk," she whispered. "Your graduation photo, the magazine article in Forbes. Every time someone visited, he'd point and say, 'That's my granddaughter.'" I turned away, afraid that if I looked any longer, every wall I'd built inside would collapse. We held a simple but warm funeral. He was buried beside the apple tree he planted back in 1985, just behind their home. But only 3 weeks later, my grandmother was hospitalized with severe heart failure. Without him, she seemed lost. I stayed by her bedside every day, working from my laptop on a fold-out chair. One night, she held my hand, her voice faint but firm. "Don't let anyone take what you've worked so hard for, Audrey. Not even under the name of family." I squeezed her hand as a silent promise. She passed away the next morning while I was making ginger tea. Word spread faster than I expected. As I signed the death paperwork at the hospital's administration office, my mother appeared with my father, and Elise. I said nothing. They launched into a parade of familiar lines. "We're all heartbroken. Matter all, we're still family. We have to get through this together." Then came the real reason. "We're in trouble. Elise lost her contract. Grant hasn't had a job since last spring. Rent's gone up. The kids need to stay in private school." I stayed quiet, eyes fixed on the old silver ring on my mother's finger, the one Grandpa had repaired for her after her accident. "We were hoping," my mother began, "you could support us, just temporarily." I nodded. "Of course." Their faces lit up. "I'm at the funeral," I added. "Everything must be settled first." They agreed, thanked me repeatedly. Ellis even cried. I didn't believe a single tear. That night, I sat alone in my grandparents' kitchen, cradling a mug of cocoa the same way my grandmother used to make it on cold evenings. I opened the envelope left for me by their attorney. Inside was a handwritten letter from my grandfather. "Audrey, we know you've endured so much. This house, fully paid off, and our remaining savings are yours, not to divide, not to apologize for anyone else, but to begin your own chapter, built on everything you rightfully deserve." I laid the letter on the table and took a deep breath. Tomorrow, I would handle the funeral, and after that, I knew it would be my turn to say no. The reading of the will took place on a gloomy Monday morning at the office of McIntyre and Hughes. The room was carpeted thick, paneled in dark mahogany, and smelled faintly of old paper and stale coffee, a fitting atmosphere for what was about to unfold. I sat at the head of the table. Across from me were my parents and Elise, looking like they'd just walked out of a courtroom after a loss. Mr. Marshall, the attorney who had worked with my grandparents for over 2 decades, adjusted his glasses and turned the pages with deliberate precision. "This is the final will and testament of Mr. Henry and Mrs. Lucille Winters, certified in Cook County on March 12th, he began, voice steady. My mother shifted uneasily. My father stared at the floor. Elise clutched her dark leather purse like it held her entire future. "We, Henry and Lucille Winters, being of sound mind and acting of our own volition, hereby leave the entire estate, located at 1817 Maple Grove Lane, along with the remaining savings totaling $147,000, to our only granddaughter, Audrey Elizabeth Winters." Silence swallowed the room. No one breathed. No one moved. Then Elise shot up. "What? That's not possible." Mr. Marshall didn't even glance up. He continued flipping to a small attached document. "Here is also a handwritten note from Mr. Henry, signed and fingerprinted, attached to the official will." He read it aloud. "Margaret, we never forgot that we transferred $204,000 to you and your husband in 2020 to help pay off debt and support Elise during her financial crisis. That assistance, though not formalized in writing, was a part of your inheritance. What remains, we leave to Audrey, not out of favoritism, but out of fairness." My mother turned pale. My father rubbed his face until his cheeks flushed. Elise sat frozen, hands limp, her purse sliding off her lap unnoticed. I said nothing. I kept my eyes steady. No tears, no outrage. After signing the final documents, I stepped into the parking lot when I heard footsteps behind me. "Sweetheart, Audrey," my mother called out, her voice trembling. "Can we talk?" I turned around. There they stood, my father disheveled, my mother gripping Elise's hand like she was holding on to something already falling apart. We really need that house," my mother said. "You know how cramped the apartment is. Elise's kids don't have space to play, and Grant has to work from home. It's too tight." "We thought we'd have a home to restart," my father added quietly. "We assumed your grandparents would understand our situation." "You mean take the house back?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "Not take," my mother rushed to explain. "Just, you have more than you need, and we—" I shook my head. "What I have now isn't because I got lucky. It's because I had no choice but to stand up after being left behind." "Don't be so harsh," my mother whispered, tears finally falling. "We're still family." I looked her in the eyes. "Family doesn't mean you're entitled to take what others spent their youth building." Elise stepped forward for the first time. "If it weren't for you, they wouldn't have had to drain their retirement to bail me out. You owe them." I laughed. Dry, sharp. I owe them one thing: to live with the integrity they taught me. And that means not giving away what they chose to leave in my care, just because someone else still hasn't learned to take responsibility. The three of them fell silent. A sharp wind swept across the parking lot, carrying the smell of gasoline and the distant sound of a car horn. I opened my car door, laid the folder gently on the passenger seat, and looked back one last time. "If you really want a new beginning," I said, "start by not depending on someone else to hand it to you." I drove off, leaving behind three figures swaying like people who just lost a dream they never helped build. In that moment, I didn't feel relief, but I felt clarity. I had chosen the right side, the side of those who love themselves enough to never let anyone take from them again. I had closed the door on the past, or at least I thought I had, 2 years after the will was read. Life in my small penthouse in Minneapolis was quiet, clean, mine. My career had taken off faster than I could have imagined, and I was preparing to buy a weekend lake property. I sent gifts to Elise's children for Thanksgiving and Christmas, not because I forgot her words, but because they were just kids and they hadn't done anything wrong. I checked in on my parents occasionally, sent them vitamins, sometimes even covered minor medical bills, but I made sure they never knew where I lived, and I never invited them too far back into my life. Then one March evening, while selecting window samples for my new lake house, I received a call from my father. "How are you, Audrey?" he asked, his voice cautious. "Your mom's had a few falls on the stairs. We're not getting any younger." I paused, mid-scrap. "I want to buy you a one-story house," I replied bluntly. "Safe, open, no stairs. But this time, the deed stays in my name." He hesitated. "You'd really do that?" "As long as you're willing to move," I said. "Not because I owe you anything, but because Grandma and Grandpa taught me how to give without letting kindness be a loophole for being taken advantage of." 2 weeks later, we found it. A ranch-style house in a quiet neighborhood in Eden Prairie with a sunny living room and a backyard big enough for kids to run wild. I paid in full, in cash. Every document was clear. I was the legal owner. Their residency was noted as indefinite loan, subject to revocation at any time. My mother teared up when I handed her the keys. "We'll host a lovely housewarming," she said. "Invite family, neighbors, so people see we're doing well." I nodded. "Just let me know the date so I can plan." 3 weeks passed, then 4. No call, no invite. One evening, while compiling a strategy report for a Denver client, a photo popped up on my screen. Tagged by one of Elise's friends. "Mom and Dad's new home is picture perfect. Can't wait for this weekend's housewarming." I clicked on Elise's profile. There they were, my parents, beaming beside a welcome home banner, holding wine glasses. Kids ran loops around a buffet table. The caption read, "Family is forever." Thank you, Elise, for organizing everything perfectly. Not a word about me, no tag, no mention. I called my mother directly. "Oh, we're still planning," she said airily. "Busy with things, maybe next week." Next week? I tilted my head, eyes on a photo time-stamped just hours earlier. Or the week after, not sure yet. I didn't argue. I just said, then I'll come by Saturday. Which Saturday? I hung up. That Saturday night, I parked 3 houses away, turned off the engine, and walked. Music, laughter, and the smell of barbecue spilled from the backyard. Through the window, I saw familiar faces. Relatives, old neighbors, the same people who once called me that quiet little Audrey. I opened the gate. No one noticed. I walked around and slipped in through the back door. In the kitchen, my mother was pouring wine, smiling. "We finally have our peaceful place," she said. Elise stood beside her, wearing an apron. "You deserve the credit, Mom. I just helped a bit." Then someone asked, "Where's Audrey? Haven't seen her." My mother froze. "She's busy. Besides, this is really just family." I stepped into the kitchen, newly renovated with granite countertops, the same ones I had paid for, and emailed the invoice to my own mother. I looked directly at them, familiar faces, now frozen, confused, and more than anything, afraid. Not of me, but of the truth that was about to be laid bare. In the living room, the music from a Bluetooth speaker still played faintly, but no one was paying attention anymore. My mother was the first to recover her voice. "Audrey, what a surprise! Why didn't you call before coming?" I took a step forward. "Well, you didn't call to invite me to this party either." A distant cousin awkwardly set her drink down. An uncle quietly ushered his wife out of the kitchen. Elise rushed in with a strained smile. "We actually meant to invite you, really. Things just moved so fast and the guest list got mixed up." "Mixed up," I cut in. "That's strange. Everyone seems to be here. Old classmates, Dad's coworkers, even Aunt Melanie flew in from Oregon. Everyone except me. The person who bought this house, paid in full, owns it legally." No one said a word. I pulled a folded document from my purse and laid it flat on the oak table. The red seal was intact. My name, Audrey Elizabeth Winters, stood out on the first page. "In case there's any confusion," I said, scanning the room with my eyes, "this house is my legal property. I didn't gift it, didn't sell it, didn't sign it over, and I certainly never gave permission for anyone to throw a party here." The air turned solid. My father walked forward, his smile tight. "You're making this too big a deal. This is family. A home is a shared thing." I looked at him, voice low and even. "I know that version of shared, Dad. Shared responsibility when it's time to assign blame, shared assets when someone needs cash, but no one ever shared the burden when I was starting from zero." A young guest walked over, lowering his voice. "What's going on?" My mother turned sharply, raising her voice. "Nothing. She's just a bit emotional. Audrey's always been too sensitive. She doesn't know how to appreciate what her family has done for her." I stared at her. "You sure you want to keep talking?" She exhaled hard, her eyes full of resentment. "We sacrificed so much for you. You've never been grateful. You think money can replace everything." "Money," I repeated, "is what you asked for 3 times last year to cover Elise's debt. It's what Dad once called material nonsense that can't replace love, yet he never refused it. This house, it was the one thing I offered freely with no strings. And you turned it into a display of your own victory." I turned toward the crowd, my voice clear and steady. "I'm sorry to interrupt the party, but I'm gonna have to ask everyone to leave now." A few guests looked like they might object, until I pulled out my phone and opened the home security app, the one that controlled every lock, every camera in the house. The room shifted. "We should go," an uncle muttered, guiding his wife away. "I can't believe this," someone whispered. Within 10 minutes, the house had emptied out. Only Elise, my parents, and her 2 kids remained, tugging at goodie bags under the table. Elise stepped closer, eyes hollow. "You're doing this, even to the kids?" I didn't turn. You planning to raise them with the same lies we were fed? My mother placed a hand on my shoulder, her voice finally shaking. Audrey, don't shut us out again. Just give me a chance. I gently removed her hand. I've given you so many, and every time you use them to erase me. This time, I'm choosing myself. I opened the front door and stepped aside. Go, before I changed the passcode. They filed out, one by one, pride nowhere to be found. Elise held her child. My father carried a half-eaten tray of cake. I shut the door behind them, the hinge clicked with finality, and in that moment, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt calm. For the first time in years, I sat alone in my own living room, poured myself a glass of wine, and let the silence settle in. Like a friend I could finally trust. The next morning, I woke up in a house that was both silent and unfamiliar. Even though I had picked out every tile, every shade of paint for my parents, I had never truly felt like I belonged there. And now, after everything that had happened, I had even less reason to keep it. I called my real estate attorney without hesitation. I want to sell the house in Eden Prairie as soon as possible. He hesitated. You just bought that place less than a year ago. I know, I cut him off. It's just an asset, and I'm done holding on to anything built on one-sided obligation. 3 weeks later, the house was sold to a young couple expecting their first child. They said they were looking for a quiet place to start a family. As I signed the final transfer documents, the young wife took my hand and smiled. Thank you for letting this house become our beginning. I didn't smile back, but I nodded, because I knew they deserved the kind of beginning I used to dream of as a child. A true home, where love wasn't conditional or rationed. Right after, I changed my phone number and deleted every remaining contact from my parents and Elise. Not out of anger. I had forgiven them, and I had closed the door. I moved back into my old apartment downtown, the one with a balcony overlooking the park, where I once sat writing the proposal that earned me a promotion to Director of Investment Analysis. From there, every morning, I brewed coffee, played soft jazz, and watched the sunlight stretch across the rooftops, no longer pulled backward by the weight of responsibilities I never chose. Once, Elise sent a handwritten letter to my office. I didn't open it. I forwarded it to the legal team with one simple instruction: block all family correspondence going forward. A week later, my father called the company's main line. The receptionist relayed the message. He says he just wants to hear his daughter's voice one last time. He says he's sick. I didn't reply, because I had spent my entire childhood waiting for a hug, for a glance of recognition, for someone to ask, "Are you okay?" But no one ever did. I wouldn't return now to hear apologies born from loss, not understanding. The following summer, I adopted a 2-year-old girl named Mila. Black hair, brown eyes, always laughing, afraid of loud noises. She had lived in a transitional shelter for abandoned children. When I held her for the first time, she wrapped her arms tightly around my neck, as if afraid that if she let go, I'd disappear too. That night, as I laid her down in her new bed, I whispered, "You'll never have to prove your worth to be loved, I promise." I started writing in a journal again, the kind I used to hide under my bed as a child. In it, I wrote down the little things I vowed to do differently as a mother. No comparisons, no silence when my child is quiet, never calling love a burden, and never, ever making a child feel like a shadow behind someone else. I didn't teach Mila that family means blood. I taught her that family is where people choose to stay, choose to listen, and choose to love, unconditionally. Once at the park, an older woman asked me, "Are you her biological mother?" I smiled. "No, but I'm the one who will never leave her." Every night, as Mila slept, I looked at her and whispered to myself, "My past will not repeat in the next generation." I couldn't change what was done to me, but I could write a new chapter. One where love wasn't sliced into pieces and handed out like favors. And if someday my parents or Elise hear about Mila, they can say whatever they want. As for me, I won't look back. I was once Audrey, the forgotten child in the corner of her own home. Now I am Audrey, the woman who rewrote what family means, the way my grandparents once dreamed but never had the chance to live. I will live it for them, and more than that, I will live it fully for myself. Audrey's story is a powerful reminder that blood doesn't guarantee unconditional love. She not only survived the pain of favoritism and betrayal, but rose above it to build a life grounded in success and compassion. Choosing to walk away from those who hurt her wasn't selfish, it was necessary. And when she chose to love a child who had been abandoned, she showed that family is built by choice, not obligation. What do you think of Audrey's decision? Would you have done the same in her shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt, eye-opening stories about family and resilience.